Released in 2011, the second generation iPad brought a much better form factor than its predecessor and was supported all the way up until 2016. Hey, how's it going? I am Josh from 91 Tech, and today we're going to be talking about the iPad 2. How does it hold up in 2018? Now, I've had this iPad for a good 4 years or so, and it's interesting to see how slowly it became more and more obsolete over the years. It was pretty good on iOS 7, a bit slow on iOS 8, and once I updated to iOS 9, well, it was practically unusable, but we will get to that in a bit. It's hard to believe this device is 7 years old already, especially when you just look at it. The design is something I personally would consider timeless, to the point that it really doesn't look like something that should be completely obsolete, but of course it is. But let's start here. The design. It has an all-aluminum enclosure that isn't terribly thin, but for the era was amazing. And even today I'd say that it's fairly acceptable, and it isn't too heavy either, which is nice. It feels good in the hand and would be very easy to bring around, so no problems there. The iPad 2 looks really good and screams of the Steve Jobs era. Everything about it just looks like old Apple. It's sleek and functional, the two design points Jobs put above all else. The iPad 2 was a huge upgrade over the first iPad released the year before, being much less clunky and basically better in every single way. A huge addition for some was the camera, which we have both on the front and back of the device. Now, the camera is garbage, literally. It's one of the worst cameras I've ever used. The rear sensor has 0.7 megapixels and can shoot video in 720p, while the front-facing camera is labeled as having VGA quality at 0.3 megapixels. It's so bad that it's almost laughable, but you know what? At least the device actually had a camera. The first iPad, after all, didn't, so this was an improvement regardless of how bad the camera is. And don't forget, this was still fairly new tech in 2011, and the cameras allowed for some fun features like photo booth, and it was a very much appreciated thing to have back in the day. And again, while the camera isn't good whatsoever, at least it works, so now I'll put some pictures up for you to judge for yourself. This right now is being filmed on the iPad 2, and it looks bad. It looks really bad, but technically it is 720p, so there's that. The display of the iPad 2 isn't much different than its predecessor, at 9.7 inches with a resolution of 768 by 1024 and pixel density of 132 pixels per inch. While the screen is pretty low quality and it isn't Retina, it doesn't look too bad. While pixels are visible, I'd say that it's good enough for the average Joe. That said, the iPad 4 and anything newer is going to have noticeably higher quality. The battery of the iPad is one of its best selling points in my opinion, at least on my model. It's sized at 6,930 mAh, which is big, although fairly average for a tablet, and it seems to perform really well. Again, at least for me. I can leave it on standby for weeks before it dies, and more intensive tasks like video streaming don't seem to really hurt it too much, which is great. Battery life is going to vary device to device depending on how heavily it's been used over the years, and so I'll reiterate that not everybody is going to have as good of an experience as me when it comes to power. But generally, I'd say that it'll last a day of heavy use without too much issue. But can you really use the iPad 2 in 2018? So far, everything has sounded pretty good. Sure, the camera sucks, but it's a tablet, so who cares? And yeah, the display could be better, but as long as it functions, it's fine, right? Unfortunately, the problems of the iPad 2 really start to show as we push a little further and look at the technical specifications. It holds Apple's A5 processor and only 512 megabytes of RAM, which isn't enough for 2018. And heck, it hasn't been good enough for years now, since the release of iOS 8 and 9. The iPad 2 really started to feel slow on iOS 8, but it was still okay. But come 2015 and the release of iOS 9, and this was no longer the story, with absolutely everything feeling brutally sluggish on the iPad. It's painful to use, and this isn't the only device that was destroyed by iOS 9. So was the 4S, iPad mini, iPod 5, and I'm not going to go too much into this because a lot of you have already heard me rant about this a dozen times, but essentially Apple screwed up and they made a ton of devices unusable with iOS 9. And unfortunately, this is the sad state that the iPad 2 is in to this day, making it completely obsolete in 2018. Now, there are still some benefits to it having iOS 9. For example, app support isn't actually too bad. You can still find apps for the iPad 2 that fully support it. A lot of apps right now have a minimum required version of iOS 9, and the iPad 2 runs iOS 9. Now, this will change pretty quick in September with the release of iOS 12, with the minimum required version going up to iOS 10, but for now, you can get latest versions of apps like YouTube and Instagram without any issue. So that's a huge plus when it comes to the iPad 2, but that said, well, first off, Instagram was actually a bad example now I'm thinking about it because Instagram really isn't made for iPads and it looks really weird. So, you know, that's just an example for iOS 9 really, but you get the idea. Essentially, the iPad 2 isn't really that obsolete when it comes to app support yet, but that will change soon. Now, what I would say is that despite this, it still is not worth it for an iPad 2, even though you can find it for well under $100 on eBay.com. Now, the only reason I would consider going out and buying one of these is if you need a really cheap device for maybe some kids. You could get some basic games on here and that would be fine. Maybe you need a Netflix/YouTube machine. I wouldn't recommend it necessarily for that because it will be kind of slow, but once you get the video running, it should be okay. Or maybe you want something you can jailbreak, because the iPad 2 is completely jailbreakable on iOS 9.3.5. And furthermore, you can actually do some stuff to downgrade it to iOS 8, and if you are lucky and have an older version of the iPad 2, you can even downgrade to iOS 6. I am not lucky. So essentially, the iPad 2 is not worth it in 2018, and you know, that's too bad, but it's not really a surprise. It's 7 years old, and while I'd say that it should be better than it is now today, with iOS 9 of course slowing it down a lot, it's still really cool to see the iPad 2 and play around with it. But for now, I really want to hear what you guys think of the iPad 2. Do you think that I'm wrong and that it is actually kind of usable in 2018? And if so, what for? Maybe comment your thoughts down below if you have something to say. Thank you so much for watching, I really do appreciate it. If this video helped you out or you found it interesting, maybe hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. You can follow me over on Twitter and Instagram, links below. And if you want to help out the channel, you can always bookmark the Amazon referral link in the description. Thanks for everything, guys. I got a lot of content coming your way. School just finished up, so you know, I have the whole summer to pretty much do whatever, so hopefully lots of stuff coming soon. And with that all said, I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.